Hello, I'm Peter Okwocha. Welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories. Countdown to Brexit. The UK will leave the European Union in just a few hours' time.
And I'm Sophie Ikenya in Westminster, the heart of the UK government as the country gears towards going it alone. What does it mean for Africa?
Effective screening is a priority in the fight against the coronavirus, says the WHO. We speak to the doctor who dealt with Kenya's first suspected case.
Whenever you're handling an infectious patient, the primary thing in your mind is that I don't want this infection to come to me.
Also on the program, mourned beyond the Middle East. Why Zanzibaris are remembering the legacy of the Sultan of Oman.
He's a part of Zanzibari. He used to help a lot of people.
And in sports, World Athletics says the controversial Nike Vaporfly will not be banned. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. It's a historic day here in the UK as the country prepares to leave the European Union in just a few hours' time. It's taken one referendum, 2 general elections, 3 prime ministers, and almost 4 years. But finally, Brexit Day is here. Lots of questions remain, but what does it mean for Africa? Well, my colleague Sophie Ikenya is in Parliament Square and we cross over to her live now. Sophie?
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Indeed, I am in Westminster. It's been quite an active afternoon here at Parliament Square. Crowds at this afternoon gathering, carrying placards, waving flags, all in support of Brexit. And really, it's tick-tock towards that moment when the UK will formally leave the European Union. It's a process, as you said, that's taken almost 4 years, Peter. And during that period, the UK has been trying to find its footing, so to speak. One of the issues that was highly debated during this campaign period was the issue of immigration. And for our African audience, of course, the big question is, how will Africa now henceforth deal with the United Kingdom? Lisa Marie Mishtag has been looking into these issues.
As soon as the referendum results were announced, the UK government began creating and debating the shape of a post-Brexit Britain. As part of those plans, continuity deals have been signed with countries across the globe, rolling over existing agreements within the EU bloc. So what deals have been signed with Africa? Well, so far, 12 countries have signed continuity agreements worth billions of US dollars. These include Morocco, Tunisia, Eastern and Southern African states. The UK's largest trading partner in Africa is South Africa, with trade worth around 7 billion US dollars.
Brexit! When do we want it? Now!
As the UK breaks away from the EU bloc, it's going the other way in Africa, with the newly formed Continental Free Trade Area. So can Africa's unified trading position be used to leverage a better partnership with Britain?
I think the whole idea of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, I think, comes into the picture, because what you want is an African consolidated view of how they can craft a relationship between the continent and the UK. So this is an opportunity, I think, to chart a new trade relationship with the United Kingdom.
The British people here, thronging the streets of central London, have mixed feelings about what a new Britain will look like on Saturday morning. But not everyone here is British, and there's been a lot of confusion about what Brexit means for those without UK citizenship.
After the agreed transition period ends in a year's time, free movement will end, and EU and non-EU citizens will all need to go through an application process to live or work in Britain. If you're from the EU, the European Economic Area or Switzerland, you and your family can apply to the EU settlement scheme to continue living in the UK after the 30th of June 2021.
There are 2 types of people: the people who have European passports and have got the right to stay here. The people who don't have the right to stay here is another issue. But in terms of a fair immigration system, whether there'll be a preference for Europeans, and depending on what is the final agreement that will be done in 12 months' time or 11 months' time, it depends on whether there'll be a preference for Europeans or whether there'll be quotas or quotas all over the world, or whether, it depends. There's a lot of questions in terms of whether the right to come here depends on your skills or the amount of money you have.
What we do know is that the UK will be out of the European Union at 11 o'clock tonight. Beyond that, it's a question of wait and see. Lisa Marie Mishtak, BBC News, London.
Well, that issue of immigration is where we start our discussion tonight. So let's bring in Naomi Grimley, our BBC's political correspondent, and Oyin Oduya. She is an economist with Golden Capital Partners. Thank you both for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. Now, let me start with you, Naomi, because immigration was one of the biggest issues that was debated during the campaigns. What will it mean for European Union citizens, those who hold European Union passports here in the UK?
Well, for the moment, nothing is going to change because we're headed into a period of transition for the next 11 months. And also, many of the EU citizens living here at the moment have acquired something called settled status, which will mean that they will be able to stay here come what may, because that is part of the withdrawal agreement. But there is, of course, the bigger question of what happens in January 2021, in a year's time, because we're still unsure really of what Britain's immigration system will be. Boris Johnson is arguing it's going to be an Australian points-based system. So it will look at candidates from around the world, not just the EU, and it will look at their skills, maybe the languages they speak, the experience they've got, and it will match it then to gaps in the British economy.
There was the argument during the debate that families will be split.
That's right, and that still remains a worry for some people about what will happen, for example, to those EU citizens who haven't acquired settled status. What will happen to them in a year's time? So there is still a lot of uncertainty, and we're expecting to hear Boris Johnson's plans for this new immigration system, which will require new legislation to go through the House of Commons. We're expecting to see those plans in March, but it is going to involve a completely different system, not reliant on the free movement, which has provided so much of the labour for the British economy over the last few years.
Yeah, so now we're now going into negotiations. It's going to be a very, very it's an uphill task really for the United Kingdom. Let me bring you in here, Oyin. When you look at the continent right now, what should they bring to the table that is solid so that they are equal partners when they are negotiating with the UK?
Well, I think African countries have quite a lot to bring to the table. If you look at the growth that you've seen over the past few years and even the growth going forward, you know that 8 out of the 15 fastest growing countries in the world are going to be in Africa. And it's also a huge consumption market. Again, by 2030, there's going to be about $7 trillion annually a year in consumption from businesses and also consumers. So I think what they bring to the table is a huge export market for the UK and for other countries who want to interact with.
The question a lot of people are asking is, are they going to trade as a bloc? Are they going to trade as individual countries? Is it going to work?
Well, I think the fact that we've seen the Africa continent free trade agreement is really a very positive thing. It brings together all the countries in the African continent, and it represents a significant amount of GDP, about 2.5 trillion. So there's no argument that negotiating as a bloc together will be much better than doing it on an individual basis, which will take a lot more time and will put some countries who have a lower amount of GDP a little bit further behind in terms of their negotiating power with the UK or other countries.
You know, it's not lost on many people that a lot of the regional blocs on the continent have been modelled around the EU structure. And then now we see a key player in the European Union leaving the EU. Do you think the continental blocs will survive when they see this?
Well, I think this is going to be a really interesting thing to keep an eye on. The fact that the UK is leaving one of the second largest economies in the world is obviously going to affect their leverage when it comes to negotiating new trade deals. And if it doesn't go as well as they hope, perhaps it could be a cautionary tale that actually you're better off sticking with your regional neighbours and negotiating as a bloc rather than trying to go it alone.
I'm curious, Naomi, because of course now the UK is negotiating, but I wonder where Africa ranks when it comes to he's going to first of all speak to the European Union countries, isn't it? But where does Africa rank when it comes to who do you negotiate with first?
Well, I think that's one of the problems because Britain is going to have several plates spinning at the same time. Its priority, obviously, is to get a free trade deal with Europe and then also America. But then there's the other countries like South Korea, China, Japan. So although they're talking about, new opportunities on the African continent as they were at that investment summit a couple of weeks ago, the reality is that they're probably going to roll over existing relationships, cut and pasted across from the relationships that they have at the moment as part of the EU. They're going to have to roll those over until such time as they've got the bandwidth to actually concentrate on African countries. So I think Boris Johnson did a good attempt at flattering a lot of the African leaders, but the bottom line is they're more worried about doing those deals with the EU and the US, and those could take much longer than they claim.
And actually, I think let's think about who at the African continent may be more worried about. The UK only exports about 3% of its goods to Africa. Think about China, India, the US. They're actually much bigger trading partners for Africa than the UK, so they may also have other priorities. The UK-Africa Investment Summit was a really big step and an important one in trying to foster ties with Africa in terms of trade and investment. But don't forget, Russia, China, the US have all done similar investment forums in the past 10 years and actually are much bigger in terms of trade. Maybe not investment, where I think the UK actually is one of the biggest investors on the continent.
What would you say is the biggest positive thing about the Brexit?
It's difficult to say. I mean, many of the Brexiteers behind us would argue that it was about sovereignty, that they felt that their voice wasn't being heard, that they felt that they were being a rule taker and not a rule maker. But as we've been saying, we're living in a globalized world where many nations are now clubbing together to find common ground on things like economic partnerships. And so the problem for Britain is it may end up in the end having to, fall in with standards that the EU is setting anyway, and yet it won't have a voice to be part of the decision making.
Yes, I think I would have to agree with that. I think obviously many people see this as an opportunity, but really the proof is going to be in the pudding as to whether the UK can get these trade deals it agrees with Africa, but also with other nations that it trades a lot more with.
All right, so where does China come in this whole debate? Do you think they're thumping their chests?
Well, I think China and Russia in particular will be pleased that Britain is peeling off from the EU, because it does weaken the EU in many ways. Britain had a diplomatic clout that it brought to the bloc. That was particularly important when it came to links with Commonwealth countries. And although people like President Macron will try and step up to the plate and argue that they can now take the lead in those fields, nevertheless, they will miss those expertise. And it goes for not just diplomacy, but on things like climate change, science and research. Britain will be missed, I think. The question is, will Britain miss Europe more than Europe will miss Britain?
A big question there. So in terms of investment, what is the biggest investment on the continent that Britain has done?
Well, I think really one of the biggest opportunities has been in infrastructure. So the UK has invested a lot in Africa. I think they're the fourth largest investor in Africa. And there's a huge opportunity in terms of infrastructure. Africa needs to invest about $150 billion annually to keep up with the growth of the continent. And so that infrastructure investment has been, I think, quite important for the UK. I think as well we're seeing a trend in the UK and also globally towards impact investing. So investing for a financial return, but also investing to do social good. And infrastructure is a really good way to do that, because it obviously helps to create jobs. There's lots of economic externalities associated with it. So investing in those sort of sectors can actually help to push Africa towards achieving sustainable development goals. And at the UK Africa Investment Summit, I know that infrastructure was one of the key winners in terms of the UK government trying to push private sector money into that sector.
All right, ladies, my time is up. We have to leave it there. Naomi, Oyin, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, my time is up, but the UK has a few more hours to go before it formally leaves the European Union. Back to you.
Many thanks, Sophie. Indeed, just over 5 hours to go before that final withdrawal. Now, let's go on to the day's other big story as countries around the world act to contain the spread of the new coronavirus that's killed more than 200 people in China. The World Health Organization has warned against closing borders and said effective screening is the priority. Suspected cases in Ethiopia, Ivory Coast and Kenya have all proven negative. Our health correspondent Rhoda Odiambo has spoken to the doctor who dealt with the first suspected case in Kenya, a student who is being discharged from hospital today.
This is Kenya's infectious diseases unit, located at the Kenyatta National Hospital, one of the largest referral hospitals in East Africa. Here is where a student suspected to have been carrying the coronavirus was isolated.
Even before admitting him, when he was even in the ambulance, I asked some questions from those who had brought him because they had the history. And they confirmed that he had traveled from Wuhan. He had been in Wuhan up to 20th of January. So they had at least confirmed. And then while at the airport, they had established that he was coughing and he was also running a fever. And that was the reason that they suspected he could be having a coronavirus infection.
Having dealt with the first suspected case in Kenya, what was going through your mind?
To be honest, whenever you're handling an infectious patient, the primary thing in your mind is that I don't want this infection to come to me. So everything, the way you do things is in a way that, yes, you take care of the patient, you give him the best care, but you will also not get infected. Basically, you don't want to get infected because you still want to continue taking care of the same patient. And then you also don't want to take an infection from this unit to the rest of the community.
When you talk about preparedness in a hospital setup like this, what does it entail?
In fact, this infectious diseases unit is part of that preparedness. So what we are saying is that basically we have a place where anyone suspected of having coronavirus infection, the novel coronavirus infection, can be kept. You take specimens while he is within the unit and is not able to infect any other person. If, in the unfortunate event, we tested someone and he became positive, he would still be kept in this unit, which means he's not going to the community to spread the infection.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okocha. Still to come on the program in sports, who's made the list? Kenya announces their marathon squad for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. I'm Peter Okocha. The top story this hour. In the last hour, Britain has lowered its flag from outside its office in Brussels to mark the country's departure from the European Union after 47 years. The UK officially leaves the bloc at 2300 hours GMT. The death of the Sultan Qaboos of Oman earlier this month drew tributes from around the world. He was the longest reigning leader of the modern Arab world. But away from Oman, one country where news of his death was keenly felt was Zanzibar. The relationship between Oman and the Indian Ocean island goes back hundreds of years. Samia Wami reports.
Beautiful beaches, a strategic trading location. It's easy to understand why in 1840, the Oman Sultan, the forefather of Sultan Qaboos, moved his kingdom's capital from Muscat to the island of Zanzibar. Said bin Sultan encouraged Zanzibaris to grow spices and embrace the slave trade along the Swahili coast. From his ventures, he profited handsomely. The same cannot be said for the locals, many of whom were simply exploited.
Sultan Qaboos' forefathers may have enslaved black East Africans, but he had a very different relationship with the island and its people. Today, many Zanzibaris talk of a blood relationship with Omanis, and so the passing of their Sultan has touched many.
He's a part of Zanzibari. He used to help a lot of people.
He has built wells using money from his own pocket. Here in Zanzibar, he has built schools.
After toppling his father with the help of Britain, Sultan Qaboos dramatically improved Oman's relations with Zanzibar. He appointed several cabinet ministers and other top government officials with Zanzibari roots. And back here in Zanzibar, he has influenced the day-to-day lives of locals. He fully funded the construction of this grand mosque, the biggest on the island. Built 3 years ago, thousands of Zanzibaris now gather here weekly for prayers. And thousands of young medics have studied at this college, also built by the Sultan over 30 years ago.
When we joined the college, we found a lot of brand new equipment and other stuff like mattresses with their plastic covers, fresh from Oman. And that college has been very significant in training local doctors here.
With Kabul's successor, Sultan Haitham bin Tariq, now in power, many Zanzibaris here are following events in Muscat, wanting to know if these close ties will change, and if so, in which direction. Sami Awami, BBC News, Zanzibar.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for sports. Mimi, what have you got for us today?
A lot of athletics, Peter. World Athletics says Nike's controversial Vaporfly range will not be banned, but there will be tighter regulations around high-tech running shoes. Any new shoe technology developed after 30th of April will have to be available on the open market for 4 months before an athlete can use it in competition. It says it has also introduced an immediate indefinite ban on any shoes that have a sole thicker than 40 millimeters. The shoe worn by Eliud Kipchoge when he became the first athlete to run a marathon in less than 2 hours last year will be banned indefinitely. And Athletics Kenya has named a star-studded marathon team for this summer's Tokyo Olympic Games. Both its marathon world record holders, Eliud Kipchoge and Bridget Kosgei, have made the list. Vivian Cheruiyot and Ruth Chepengetich are also named, as is last year's Boston Marathon winner, Lawrence Cherono.
The team that they have selected today is very strong, and I want to say that if everything is going to go well, I think we are going to be top 3. All of us, we are going to be top 3. Also, I know most they know that the Bridget, Vivian, and Ruth Chepengetich, they are fastest in the world this year, and most of the countries they feel like they are a strong team, but I know we are going to do our best.
Personally, I'm so grateful because this will be my first time to represent a country, and I know that with teamwork, with dedication, discipline, I will go and make good results in Olympic.
To football. Just a few hours left before the close of the football transfer window in Europe. And we reported on Thursday that Gaitam Bong was having a medical. Well, the deal has now gone through. The Brighton defender has joined Nottingham Forest for an undisclosed fee. The 31-year-old Cameroon international has agreed a deal until the summer of 2022. And Ghana's Alfred Duncan has moved on loan to Fiorentina from Serie A rival Sassuolo. Fiorentina have also signed Ivory Coast Christian Kouame. Still in football, the Libya Football Federation has accepted an invite by the Confederation of African Football to take part in the upcoming African Nations Championship or CHAN finals in Cameroon. They're replacing Tunisia, who withdrew from the tournament for locally based players. Their clubs were unwilling to release their players for the tournament as it's not on the FIFA calendar for international matches. The North African country has now been banned from the competition and fined $50,000. The tournament kicks off in April. That's all the sport, Peter.
Many thanks. Thank you. Now, just before we go, let's leave you with these live pictures from the UK's Parliament buildings in Westminster as the country prepares to leave the European Union in just 5 hours' time. The focus for the UK will now turn to striking deals around the world. How many of them will be with African countries, and how will they benefit the continent and its people? Those questions remain. But for now, with just hours to go before history is made, that's it from us here at Focus on Africa.